There are people who bother you before they even speak. You see them walk into the room, and something tightens. You don't know why. They haven't done anything wrong. They haven't insulted you. They haven't crossed a boundary. But your body reacts. A slight contraction in your chest. A quiet irritation rising. An urge to pull away. You tell yourself it's nothing. But it's not nothing. Maybe it's their confidence. The way they speak without hesitation. The way they seem certain. Or maybe it's the opposite. Their passivity. Their need for reassurance. Their soft-spoken uncertainty. Whatever it is, your reaction is immediate, and it feels disproportionate. That's the part that lingers. Because the reaction isn't neutral. It isn't mild discomfort. It's charged, and the charge feels personal. You may think, I just don't like people like that. But pause for a moment. What exactly is like that? If someone is arrogant, you feel irritated. If someone is overly agreeable, you feel irritated. If someone dominates conversations, irritated. If someone avoids eye contact, irritated. Notice something. The external traits vary, but the intensity of your reaction is similar. The reaction isn't about a specific personality type. It's about something inside you that feels threatened. Carl Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That sentence is uncomfortable because it suggests that the irritation is not random. It's reflective. Projection is one of the psyche's quiet defense mechanisms. It protects the ego. When there's a trait within us that we have rejected, suppressed, or judged, we become hypersensitive to seeing it externally, not because it is objectively wrong, but because it mirrors something unresolved. For example, you might feel irritated by someone who is overly confident. You label them arrogant, self-absorbed, insensitive, but internally, there may be a part of you that struggles to express confidence at all. You suppress your own assertiveness. You second-guess your voice. You hesitate before speaking. And when someone expresses what you cannot, it creates friction, not admiration. Friction. The ego interprets that friction as dislike, but the body feels it as contraction. Or maybe you're irritated by someone who is constantly seeking reassurance. You think they're too needy, but perhaps you learned early on that needing support was weakness. So you suppress your own dependency. You became self-reliant, independent, emotionally contained. Now, when someone openly expresses need, it feels foreign, uncomfortable, because it confronts a part of you that was denied. Projection doesn't mean you secretly are that person. It means that a quality you haven't integrated is being activated. The key word is integrated, not suppressed, not indulged, integrated. When a trait is integrated, it doesn't provoke a strong emotional reaction. You can observe it calmly. You might not prefer it, but it doesn't tighten your chest. It doesn't spike your irritation. Think about this in daily life. You're in a meeting. Someone confidently challenges the manager. Your jaw tightens. You think they're reckless. But maybe you wanted to challenge authority yourself, and you never allowed it. Or you're with friends. Someone openly talks about their achievements. You label it as bragging, but maybe you've minimized your own accomplishments for years. And seeing someone own theirs feels threatening. The intensity is the clue, not the trait. The intensity. If someone's behavior is mildly annoying, that's normal preference. But when it feels charged, immediate, visceral, disproportionate, something deeper is happening. Projection is not conscious. You don't wake up thinking, I will project today. It operates automatically. It preserves your self-image. If you see yourself as humble, you may reject any internal capacity for pride. If you see yourself as kind, you may deny your own capacity for aggression. But denying a trait doesn't eliminate it. It pushes it into the unconscious. And the unconscious does not disappear. It expresses itself indirectly, often through irritation. Your reaction to someone else becomes a stage where your disowned traits perform. The person in front of you becomes a screen, and your psyche projects an image onto it. You believe you're reacting to them, but you're reacting to the reflection. This is why certain people can bother you in ways that others don't even notice. One friend may find that confident colleague inspiring. You find them intolerable. Why? Because projection is personal. It's tailored to your internal structure, your history, your conditioning, your identity. Projection often forms around traits that were discouraged during development. If you were punished for being expressive, you may resent expressive people. If you were criticized for ambition, you may judge ambitious people harshly. If you were told to stay quiet, assertiveness may feel aggressive to you. The irritation is not random. It is patterned, and it repeats. Notice how certain personality types trigger you consistently. Different faces, same reaction. That repetition is psychological, not accidental. And here is something important. Not every irritation is projection. Sometimes someone is genuinely behaving irresponsibly. Sometimes boundaries are being crossed. Sometimes harm is real. Projection is not an excuse to tolerate mistreatment. But when the reaction feels disproportionate to the situation, it deserves examination. When your body reacts before your mind can articulate why, that is data. Projection is fast. It bypasses analysis. It feels obvious. It's just who they are. But if it were purely objective, everyone would react the same way. They don't. You may notice that after encountering someone who triggers you, you replay the interaction. You justify your reaction. You mentally argue with them. You feel a subtle agitation in your body even hours later. That lingering charge suggests the reaction touched something internal, something unresolved. Projection protects your self-concept. If you believe you are not like that, the psyche ensures you distance yourself from that trait externally. But integration begins when you ask a different question. What exactly about this person is activating me? Not in a blaming way, in a curious way. What trait? What behavior? What tone? What confidence level? What vulnerability? Be specific. Vagueness keeps projection alive. Specificity begins to dissolve it. For example, it bothers me that they speak without hesitation. Why? Because they don't seem afraid of being wrong. Why does that bother you? Because maybe you are deeply afraid of being wrong. The irritation becomes a doorway, but only if you are willing to step through it. Most people stay at the surface. They're just annoying. End of analysis. But psychological maturity asks for deeper honesty, not self-blame, self-awareness. Projection is not evidence that you're flawed. It is evidence that parts of you are unexamined. Unintegrated traits do not disappear. They live in the shadow. Jung described the shadow as the aspects of the personality that the ego does not identify with. These aspects are not necessarily negative. They are simply rejected. Sometimes you reject your aggression. Sometimes your ambition. Sometimes your sensitivity. Sometimes your vulnerability. The more rigid your self-image, the stronger your projections. If you see yourself as only calm, anger will disturb you externally. If you see yourself as only rational, emotional people will irritate you. If you see yourself as only independent, dependency will feel weak. But human nature is broader than any self-label. And when your identity becomes too narrow, the shadow carries what doesn't fit. Then the world mirrors it back to you, not to punish you, to confront you. The discomfort you feel is not random social friction. It is an invitation. But invitations can feel threatening because they destabilize identity. If you admit that what bothers you reflects something within you, the ego loses its simplicity. You are no longer purely the good one reacting to the flawed one. You are more complex, more layered, and complexity requires humility. That humility is the beginning of individuation, but it begins with irritation, with that subtle tightening in your chest when someone walks into the room. The question is not, why are they like that? The deeper question is, why does this particular trait disturb me so quickly? That question shifts power. It moves attention inward, and that inward shift is where psychological growth begins. You don't just dislike them. You feel something sharper, a subtle agitation, a tightening in your jaw, a quick internal judgment that forms before you've even gathered evidence. And if you're honest, the reaction feels protective, as if something inside you is defending itself. This is where projection deepens, because irritation is rarely about the other person alone. It is about identity. When someone triggers you instantly, they are often touching the edge of your self-concept. And the ego does not like its edges exposed. The ego prefers clarity. I am this. I am not that. Projection protects those boundaries. For example, if you built your identity around being calm, you may feel disturbed by openly angry people. Their anger feels chaotic, unstable, immature. But what if a disturbance isn't about their anger alone? What if it's about your relationship with your own anger? If you were taught that anger was dangerous, if expressing it led to punishment or rejection, if you learned to suppress it in order to stay accepted, then your calmness may not be pure serenity. It may be controlled suppression. And when someone expresses anger freely, even imperfectly, it destabilizes your identity. You experience it as threat, because unconsciously, you've disowned that energy. Carl Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The darkness here is not evil. It is simply what you have refused to acknowledge. Projection is the ego's way of keeping that darkness outside. As long as the trait exists out there, you can maintain the illusion of being free from it. But the psyche is not that simple. The qualities you reject don't vanish. They accumulate in the shadow, and the shadow seeks expression. If it cannot express through conscious behavior, it will express through reaction. That reaction often looks like irritation. Let's ground this in something ordinary. You're in a group setting. Someone speaks confidently about their accomplishments. They don't downplay them. They don't soften their voice. They don't apologize for taking up space. You feel immediate resistance. You label it arrogance. But internally, something else is happening. Perhaps you learned that self-promotion was unattractive. Perhaps you were praised for humility and punished for standing out. So you shaped yourself into someone who minimizes success. Now, when someone else does the opposite, it feels wrong. Not objectively wrong, but threatening to your self-definition. Your ego whispers, "They're too much." But what it might mean is, "I never allowed myself to be that much." Projection works both ways. You can project disowned weakness, and you can project disowned strength. Sometimes the people who bother you most embody qualities you secretly desire: freedom, boldness, emotional openness, ambition. But because those traits were suppressed in you, they surface as irritation instead of admiration. The ego does not easily admit envy, so it disguises it as judgment. This is why some reactions feel confusing. You might intellectually respect someone, but emotionally, you feel disturbed by them. The disturbance signals inner tension. There is also another dynamic at play. Projection preserves moral superiority. If you label someone as selfish, you position yourself as generous. If you label someone as dramatic, you position yourself as rational. If you label someone as weak, you position yourself as strong. This contrast stabilizes identity, but it is fragile because it depends on external comparison. The moment someone reflects a trait you've denied in yourself, the contrast blurs, and the ego panics. You may notice this in subtle physical ways. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your shoulders tense. You feel restless in their presence. You want distance. Distance restores identity. Closeness increases discomfort. The more time you spend around someone who mirrors your shadow, the more pressure builds. You may start finding reasons to criticize them. Small behaviors become amplified. You become hyper-aware of their tone, their posture, their habits. This hyperfocus is psychological defense. It keeps attention outward. As long as the spotlight stays on them, you don't have to look inward. But here is the structural truth. Projection is not random irritation. It is misdirected self-confrontation. The psyche chooses a target and directs unintegrated material toward it. That target becomes symbolic. For example, if you were shamed for being emotional, emotional people may irritate you. If you were shamed for being ambitious, ambitious people may irritate you. If you were shamed for being assertive, assertive people may irritate you. The irritation protects the old wound. It keeps you aligned with the identity you built to survive. But survival identity is not the same as authentic identity. Individuation, in Jungian psychology, is the process of integrating what was split off. It requires facing what you rejected, not indulging it blindly, not acting it out impulsively, but acknowledging it consciously. Let's clarify something important. Recognizing projection does not mean excusing harmful behavior. If someone is manipulative, abusive, or disrespectful, boundaries are necessary. Projection applies when a reaction is intense relative to the situation, when emotional charge exceeds the objective offense. That charge is a signal. You may notice patterns across years. The same type of person keeps triggering you. Different workplace, different friend group, same emotional reaction. That repetition is not coincidence. It reflects a stable internal split. Part of you has been denied, and the denied part keeps returning in external form until it is acknowledged. There is also discomfort in admitting this, because it disrupts the simplicity of blame. Blame is stabilizing. If they were different, I'd feel fine. Projection complicates that. It suggests, if I were more integrated, I might react differently. That is not self-blame. It is self-responsibility. And self-responsibility can feel destabilizing at first. You may resist this idea. You may think, no, they really are the problem. Sometimes they are, but the emotional intensity still belongs to you. Even when someone behaves poorly, your reaction reveals your structure. Two people can experience the same arrogance. One shrugs. One burns internally for hours. The difference is internal alignment. When traits are integrated, they do not threaten identity. You can observe them neutrally. When traits are disowned, they feel invasive. There's also a deeper layer. Projection often hides unlived potential. If you were conditioned to stay small, confident people may disturb you. If you were conditioned to be strong at all times, vulnerable people may disturb you. If you were conditioned to serve others, self-focused individuals may disturb you. But beneath irritation may lie fear. Fear of expanding beyond your old role. Fear of confronting what you suppressed. Fear of destabilizing relationships that depended on your limited identity. Because integrating a disowned trait changes behavior. If you integrate assertiveness, you may set clearer boundaries. If you integrate vulnerability, you may express need. If you integrate ambition, you may pursue opportunities you once avoided. Those shifts can alter your social environment, and the ego prefers predictability. Projection keeps everything in place. It allows you to remain who you've always been, as long as the problem is out there. But growth requires discomfort, not dramatic upheaval, not personality transformation overnight, but honest recognition. When someone bothers you instantly, instead of rushing to judgment, pause. Notice the body. Notice the thought. Notice the label you assign. Then ask quietly, what does this trait represent to me? What would it mean if I allowed myself to express a healthy version of this quality? Healthy aggression becomes assertiveness. Healthy pride becomes confidence. Healthy dependency becomes connection. Healthy ambition becomes direction. Projection often hides a healthy core of a rejected trait, because what was once shamed may have been exaggerated. So you rejected it entirely. But maturity means differentiation. You don't have to become the person who triggers you. You don't have to imitate them. You simply need to reclaim the part of you that reacts. That is structural understanding. The irritation is not proof that you are morally superior. It is evidence that identity has been narrowly defined. And when identity is narrow, the shadow grows large. The more rigid your self-image, the stronger your projections. The more flexible your identity, the calmer your reactions. Projection decreases as integration increases. This is not instant. It requires humility. It requires observing your own defensiveness without collapsing into shame. Because the goal is not self-criticism. It is expansion. When you admit, this trait disturbs me because I've disowned it, something shifts. The emotional charge softens. Not immediately, but gradually. You begin to see the person more clearly. Less symbol, more human. And in that clarity, irritation loses intensity. The ego relaxes. Because identity is no longer threatened by complexity. The people who once bothered you most become teachers. Not because they're enlightened, but because they revealed your blind spots. And blind spots once seen, lose their power. The reaction that once felt automatic becomes conscious. And once conscious, it can be regulated. That is where individuation moves from theory to behavior, from projection to ownership, from irritation to integration. The next time someone instantly bothers you, don't correct it. Don't suppress it. Don't justify it either. Just notice it. Notice how fast it happens. Before logic, before analysis, before you can even explain it. Your body knows first. A contraction in the stomach, a slight tightening around the eyes, a sudden shift in tone. This is the moment most people miss, because the instinct is to move outward, to label, to criticize, to distance. But integration begins when you move inward instead. When you feel that immediate irritation, pause internally and ask, what exactly am I reacting to? Not why are they like this, but what trait is activating me? Be precise. Is it their confidence, their emotional expressiveness, their passivity, their attention-seeking behavior? Name the trait without commentary. Just identify it. Then take the second step, which is harder. Where does this quality exist in me? Not in exaggerated form you're seeing, but in potential. For example, if you're irritated by someone's arrogance, look for your own suppressed pride. Have there been moments you minimize your achievements to stay acceptable? Have you felt a quiet desire to speak more boldly, but held back? If you're irritated by someone's neediness, look for your own denied dependency. When was the last time you asked directly for support? When was the last time you allowed yourself to admit you were overwhelmed? Projection dissolves when you claim ownership of a reaction. Ownership does not mean self-blame. It means recognizing that your emotional charge belongs to you. Here is what changes behaviorally when you begin integrating instead of projecting. First, your reactions slow down. The irritation still arises, but instead of escalating, it stabilizes. You might still feel tension in your body, but you don't act from it. You observe it. Observation interrupts automatic judgment. Second, your language changes. Instead of saying, they're so full of themselves, you internally reframe, I feel uncomfortable around strong self-promotion. That shift moves from accusation to awareness. Third, your boundaries become clearer. Integration does not mean tolerating everything. If someone's behavior genuinely crosses a line, you address it calmly, but the tone changes. You are not reacting from wounded identity. You are responding from grounded clarity. There is a physical difference. Projection feels hot. Integration feels steady. Projection accelerates your heartbeat. Integration slows your breathing. Projection makes you rehearse arguments in your head for hours. Integration allows you to let the interaction pass without lingering resentment. This is nervous system regulation in action. When you reclaim a disowned trait, the external mirror loses its emotional charge. For example, if you begin practicing healthy assertiveness in small ways, overly confident people will disturb you less. If you begin expressing vulnerability in safe relationships, emotionally expressive people will feel less overwhelming. If you allow yourself ambition, ambitious people will feel less threatening. You don't become them. You expand. That expansion softens projection. There is also a humility that emerges. You realize you are more complex than your self-image allowed. You are not only calm. You are not only rational. You are not only independent. You contain anger. You contain need. You contain pride. You contain insecurity. And acknowledging that does not weaken you. It stabilizes you. Jung emphasized that individuation requires integrating opposites within the personality. Strength and vulnerability. Confidence and humility. Independence and connection. When you cling rigidly to one side, the other side becomes shadow. When the shadow is denied, it appears externally as irritation. But when both sides are acknowledged internally, the world feels less threatening. This shows up in subtle daily behavior. You stop overanalyzing certain people. You stop venting repeatedly about the same personality type. You notice that the people who once drained you emotionally no longer hold the same intensity. You may still not prefer their style, but you are not destabilized by it. That is integration. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. There is no dramatic breakthrough. just reduced reactivity, more space between stimulus and response, more proportional reactions. You also become more discerning, because when projection decreases, clarity increases. You can distinguish between genuine boundary violations and internal triggers. Earlier, everything felt personal. Now, fewer things do. Earlier, criticism felt threatening. Now, it feels informative or dismissible depending on context. Earlier, someone else's confidence felt like competition. Now it feels neutral. The energy you use to spend resisting certain personalities becomes available for something else. Focus, creativity, self-development. You're no longer unconsciously battling reflections. You are engaging reality more directly. This does not mean you will never feel irritation again. Projection is part human psychology. It will surface in new forms. But once you understand the mechanism, you respond differently. Instead of saying, "Why are they like that?" you begin asking, "What is this showing me?" That question alone changes your internal posture. It shifts you from defensive to curious. Curiosity regulates. Defensiveness inflames. You may also notice something unexpected. Compassion increases, not because you excuse behavior, but because you recognize how much of human interaction is unconscious. The person triggering you may also be projecting. They may be defending their own shadow. Seeing this reduces personalization. You stop turning every discomfort into a character judgment, and this is where emotional maturity stabilizes. You become less reactive, less rigid, less invested in proving yourself different. The people who once symbolized threat become ordinary, just people. And when people become ordinary instead of symbolic, emotional charge decreases. That is a shift from projection to integration. It does not make you passive. It makes you grounded. It does not remove discernment. It refines it. You respond proportionally. You speak when needed. You withdraw when appropriate. But you no longer carry lingering agitation for hours over minor traits. That is freedom, not dramatic freedom. Quiet freedom. Freedom from fighting parts of yourself through others. When you reclaim disowned traits, identity becomes broader. And broader identity is harder to threaten. You don't need to defend who you are as aggressively, because you are not narrowly defined. The ego relaxes. And when the ego relaxes, the world feels less hostile. The person who instantly bothered you becomes a mirror you no longer fear. You don't shatter when you see yourself reflected in unfamiliar ways. You remain steady. And steadiness is what psychological growth actually looks like. Not transformation into someone else, but reconciliation with the parts you once rejected. That reconciliation reduces friction, externally and internally. The irritation that once felt automatic becomes optional, and optional reactions are the beginning of conscious living. There's a reason the reaction feels instant. It bypasses logic. It bypasses fairness. It feels almost automatic because it is old, older than the person in front of you, older than the situation. The irritation isn't random. It's patterned. Certain people disturb you not because they're uniquely flawed, but because they press against parts of you that were never fully allowed to exist. The confident person challenges your suppressed boldness. The needy person challenges your disowned vulnerability. The arrogant person challenges your hidden pride. The passive person challenges your unexpressed anger. The reaction feels external, but its roots are internal. And this is not something to feel ashamed of. It is human. Projection is not a character defect. It is a protective reflex. The psyche would rather defend a stable identity than expand it. But expansion is exactly what individuation requires. You are not meant to become the person who triggers you. You are meant to reclaim the piece of yourself that reacts to them. When you do that, something subtle shifts. The emotional charge decreases. The tightness softens. The judgment becomes curiosity. And suddenly, the person who once felt threatening just feels human, not symbolic, not personal, just human. That is maturity. Not the absence of irritation, but the ability to ask, "What is this showing me?" instead of, "What is wrong with them?" The world becomes less hostile when you stop fighting reflections, And identity becomes stronger when it no longer depends on rejecting certain traits. Integration does not make you perfect. It makes you stable. And stability is quieter than judgment, but far more powerful. Before you leave, think of one person who consistently triggers you. Not someone who has harmed you. Not someone unsafe. Just someone who activates you quickly. What specific trait bothers you the most? Write it down. Then ask yourself, honestly, where does that trait exist in me? You don't have to share the answer. But if this resonated, leave a comment with just a trait. One word: confidence, neediness, control, attention-seeking, passivity. Let's make the unconscious visible. And if you're ready to go deeper into shadow integration, not conceptually but behaviorally, continue to the next video, because awareness is only the first step. Integration is where your identity actually changes. Quietly, stably, without performance. I'll see you there.